Okay, we are going to be talking about the internal environment of the firm. So this is chapter 4, analyzing the internal environment. And these are the areas that we're going to be covered in this lecture. The internal analysis of that firm is based on the resource-based view. That was that of the 5 theories of strategic thought. This was the 4th of those 5 theories, looking at those resources, competencies, core competencies, capacities that firm has available. So what we're doing in this particular chapter is analyzing then whether or not that firm has these different distinct competencies that it might be able to then create a competitive advantage. We're going to then look at the relationship between competence, core competence, distinct competence, and as that moves forward to a competitive advantage. There's a simple little back of the envelope type of analysis that managers can do to look at their resources and capabilities to see if they might be able to create a competitive advantage. And it's called the VRIO framework. We'll look at that. And then we'll discuss the balanced scorecard and the different perspectives that go along with that. There's 4 of them. Now, your simulation is based on the balanced scorecard. So it's not just based on net income. There's other areas of performance that go into looking at the overall performance of that firm. And that's based on the balanced scorecard. We'll take a look at, since we are doing internal analysis of the firm, financial ratios, which ones are important and which ones we should consider. Looking also at the primary and support activities of the firm's value chain, because this is a functional activity that is done internally. So we want to analyze that value chain that the firm is using to see whether or not there's any advantages or disadvantages that the firm has in that value chain. We'll also just kind of briefly go over some of the other functional areas of that firm, management, culture, marketing, finance, accounting, production, operations, R&D, and MIS. And then we have some matrices that we will be working on in this chapter. As I mentioned to you when we did the external factors evaluation, that there would be a companion to that, and that's the internal factors evaluation. We'll be doing that in this chapter, looking at those strengths and weaknesses. And then we're going to combine those 2 outputs into the IE matrix, and that'll give us our first recommended strategy based on that firm's strengths, weaknesses, and what it sees are opportunities that it can capitalize on and threats that it can mitigate. And then lastly, there is the SFAS, Strategic Factors Analysis Summary, that we will do in this chapter. And what we do with that particular analysis is that we take the most important factors from our EFE and our IFE, and we put those in the SFAS. And it's kind of a summary page then for those decision makers looking at the most important aspects of what we determined from our SWOT analysis and what went into our EFE and our IFE. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the areas that require extensive review and analysis from our firm. Well, first of all, we're going to be looking at our managers, not only the senior level managers, but all the functional level managers. And what we're looking for is whether or not they have the skills to be in that particular area of management. And remember what I was talking about with Ansoff, and this has to do with stacking the deck. You want to make sure that you have the right person in the right job. And so what we're doing here is looking then at all management and determining whether or not those managers in those positions are the best persons, most qualified, most capable people for that position that they hold. We're going to be looking at operations, marketing, the production capacity and efficiency. All of these things are the things that you guys are doing in your simulation. Human resource, finance, R&D, and then internal guidance. That is command and control. That's the organizational structure is the organizational structure designed in such a way that it provides clear communication, coordination of activities that go on within that organization? And then, of course, we want to revisit our vision and mission to make sure that those are in, or our strategy is in alignment with the vision and mission statement. So as mentioned, this is based on the resource-based view. That is that strategic approach that focuses on the identification of the firm's resources. We're going through an internal analysis. This now is internal. What kind of resources do we have available to that firm? What kind of capabilities are available for our firm? What kind of competencies does our firm have and those employees? When we exploit these, then might enable that firm to achieve a competitive advantage, which would lead to hopefully superior long-term performance. Now, when we're thinking about resources, what we're actually considering here are the firm's tangible and intangible assets. And just a few of those would be human resources, financial, certainly the amount of money that you might have or the ability to obtain funds, physical assets, like your plant, machinery, those things, information, technology, and infrastructure. So let's take a look at capabilities. Now, capabilities, when we define those are what we do internally in the transference of input to output. That's the skills that the firm has. So it refers then to that firm's ability to do that, to effectively transform those inputs, raw material, labor, information, into the outputs to meet those objectives and exploit those resources. They are functionally based. Things like people, the skills and knowledge that those people have. Physical resources, plants, machinery, equipment, computer systems, those things. Financial resources, operating systems, information systems, the control and the access over that information that comes into that firm and within that firm is able to be dispersed. The creation of intellectual property, the relationship that we have with our suppliers. So those are just a few of capabilities. We got a few more that I'm going to show you here in just a second. Let's take a look at resources. So if we're looking at resources, as I mentioned, we break it down into two areas. One is tangible resources, and the other one is intangible resources. So let's discuss what would be considered tangible resources. Financially, the firm's cash or cash equivalents, the firm's capacity to raise equity, that would be stock, the firm's borrowing capacity, that would be credit ratings, physical. Now we're looking at the plants and facilities and whether or not those plants and facilities are located in favorable manufacturing locations. And then the machinery that is used within those plants and facilities, are they state of the art? Technology. Things like trade secrets, any kind of innovative production process, patents, copyrights, trademarks would all be considered tangible resources under technology. And then organizationally, does the firm follow effective strategic planning processes? And in addition to that, do they follow an excellent evaluation and control system? There's been extent research done on firms that follow formalized strategic planning processes and their performance over firms that don't. And it's significant. The ones that do follow formalized strategic planning outproduce, outperform those firms that don't. intangible resources. Human. This is the people that we have working for us. Are they experienced? Are they capable? What kind of skills do they have? What about trust that exists between management and employees and management? It has to go both ways. Do those employees trust what managers are saying to them? Do managers trust what those employees are telling them? And then the skills of our managers. Do they have the skills that are requisite for that position that they hold? Any kind of firm-specific practices or procedures that might be unique to just that company. We've learned how to do a certain things uniquely well. And by performing it in this manner, we are able to be more efficient and more effective. That comes from that human element. Innovation, the skills then that those people have within that firm for scientific and technological advancements and innovative skills and capacities. And then finally, under intangible, we are looking at the firm's brand name. Certainly, a good brand name image is exploitable. The reputation that that firm has with the customers for quality and reliability. And in addition to that, the reputation that that firm has with suppliers for being fair with them. Now, touching again on capabilities of the organization, again, this is that transference of inputs to outputs. And when we're looking at the capacity element, this is the amount of work that can get done. It is the combination then of the tangible and intangible resources along with the capabilities of that firm. That's the amount of work that that firm is able to produce. So capacities of that firm, which is important to know, because when we're looking at output, what kind of capacity does the firm have for output? It is the combination of the tangible, the intangible, and the capabilities. So some examples, in addition to what I've already given you about capabilities: outstanding customer service, the firm's ability to produce and develop new products and skills, the innovativeness of the products and services. How creative are they? How unique are they? How cutting edge are they? And then, of course, with HR, the firm's ability to hire and motivate and retain human capital. Now, you'll notice in the bottom right-hand quadrant of this slide here, it's talking about the importance is that resources alone do not provide a competitive advantage. So when we're looking at resources, both tangible and intangible, unless we exploit them, they really don't do you any benefit. If you have a great brand name and no one knows that you have great brand name, or if you have modern plants and facility and state-of-the-art machinery that can produce high quality products, and you're not exploiting that, it really doesn't provide you that competitive advantage. The competitive advantage comes from those competitors out there knowing that what you have, and those customers out there knowing that what you can do is better than the competition. That's where it comes from. I mentioned in our lead up to this about that short form, quick analysis of whether or not a firm would be able to have any kind of competitive advantage based on its resources and capabilities. And it was called the Vario framework. So here's a quick look at that. So it's an acronym for valuable, rare, inimitable, and organized. So you look at your resources and capabilities, and does it provide customer value? And with that, does it provide possibly a competitive advantage? That would be valuable. Does the customer value what it is that you are able to provide to them using your resources and capabilities and capacities, competencies. Rare. Do any of your other competitors possess it? Is it something that they need and they don't have and you do? Inevitable. Is it costly for those competitors to obtain that resource, both tangible and intangible, or the capabilities that you have? And then lastly, organized. Is the firm in a position where it can exploit those resources and capabilities? Let's talk about competencies. We're going to start this whole little string of events here leading up to a competitive advantage, but we begin this with competencies. So when we're analyzing internally in our firm, what we're looking at are those areas of our firm where we do things well. Those are called competencies. They are cross-functional. That means they go through functional departments. They are integrated and coordinated, and they are the firm's capabilities. That's that transference to inputs to outputs, competencies. These are the things that we do to make that good or provide that service. They are a product of organizational learning and experience. And competencies represent something that they do well. It's a real proficiency in performing that internal activity. So one of the first things we look at internally, we identify our competencies. What are these things that the firm does well? Now, secondly, beyond competencies, we look at, is that competency a core competency? Is it a main strength of that company? Again, this is now a collection of these competencies, and they do, again, cross divisional boundaries. They are, again, collaborative and, again, widespread within that organization. And there are things that the firm does exceedingly well. An example of a core competency would be product quality or customer service or reliability. Those are things that would be core competence. They are a main strength of that company. Going a step farther, now we're looking at distinct competencies. These are then those core competencies that we just identified. And what we're trying to determine now is, are those core competencies that we identified, are they unique? Are they distinctive in that industry? Are they competencies that are not easily matched or imitated by the competition? Now, you might have competitors out there that have these competencies, but to match them or imitate them to your level, it's very, very difficult for them to do. So they then are distinct competencies for your firm. So distinct competencies can come from competitive activities such as the firm's technology and technology development, creativity in technology, advancements in technology, the firm's position in the industry, market relations, how that firm is positioned in that market. Does it have exceptional brand name recognition? Low costs. Does the firm have the ability to do that transference of inputs to outputs and keep all of their operational costs low? Quality, business processes, those things internally that we do to move the business along. It may not be in the production of that product or service, but it might be the processes that are used internally that support that. And then in addition to that, now we add manufacturing processes. Core competencies can come from people, their skills, customer satisfaction and customer service. And I'm sure you've all shopped at firms that have had extraordinary customer service, and you've all shopped at companies that have less than stellar customer service. There's an advantage that one has over the other, and that just comes from one area, and that's customer service. And of course, if you are satisfied with that service, you've added another dimension in an area of distinct competencies. Now, when we have these distinct competencies, and what we're trying to do is identify as many of them as we can. We want to have a full quiver full of distinct competencies, because what we're going to try and do is take these distinct competencies and turn them into competitive advantages. So distinct competencies create competitive advantage. Now, it can be done a couple of different ways. You can do it through many areas that I listed in that previous slide, but it can support your low-cost strategy, and it can support your differentiation strategy. Customer service, customer satisfaction, unique product development, all of those things, low-cost manufacturing, it supports both of those types of strategies. Let's take a look at sustainability. One area that firms really try to achieve, and it's very, very difficult to achieve this, is something called a sustainable competitive advantage. This now is an advantage, a competitive advantage that lasts for some given period of time. Now, that's the tricky question. How long is sustainability? Because here's what happens in industry. And if you can visualize what I'm talking about here, if you have a business and your business is at a competitive disadvantage, that means that some other company out there has an advantage over you. And if they have an advantage over you, they are then taking either customers from you or profits from you, or both. You are at a disadvantage. And the more of those advantages that they have, the deeper hole your company's in. So the main thing that your company is going to try to do, if you're at a competitive disadvantage, is to at least make competitive parity, where both companies are equal. And if you think about a sustainable competitive advantage, that then is a competitive advantage that a firm has over another one that lasts for some given period of time. And so those firms that are at a competitive advantage, they're going to do whatever they can to try to mitigate that and make at least competitive parity. All right. Let's take a look at evaluating the firm's performance. This would be an area that we're going to be analyzing internally. First area, of course, which is important, is the firm's financial position. And this is done quite easily by looking at the financial ratios. And I'm sure all of you have had finance, and you're well aware of the financial ratios that determine firm performance. And so I'm not going to have you redo what you've done in finance. You don't need to do that. You just have an awareness of those ratios and what those ratios mean. But let's take a look at what we would be analyzing here. So what we're going to be looking at then would be specifically these types of ratios. We want to see how liquid that firm is. So we'd be looking at current ratio, and we could do a quick ratio. We want to see if that firm is leveraged. So we'd be look at debt to total asset, debt to equity, long-term debt to equity, and then times interest earned ratio. Activity is always important, especially when we're looking at some sort of manufacturing or products. We're looking for turnover, especially if we're holding inventory. How many inventory turns do we have a year? What about our fixed asset turnover? What about our total asset turnover? What about accounts receivable turnover? And then what's our collection period for those who might owe us some money? A little bit farther on with financial ratios, we're looking at profitability. The gross profit margin. operating profit margin, net profit margin, return on asset, return on equity, earnings per share, and PE ratio. And then finally, is the firm growing? Now we're looking at growth ratios, sales, net income, earnings per share, dividends per share. So those would be areas that we would analyze within that firm to determine its financial position. And obviously what you would want to do is take a look at the current snapshot and maybe, previous snapshots over 3, 6 months, 9 months, a year back, and see whether or not there's a trend that's involved in those financial performance indicators. Let's jump over to something called the balanced scorecard. Now, the balanced scorecard, this was developed by Kaplan and Norton out of Harvard. And when they developed this, it was because of the need that firms, prior to the balanced scorecard being developed, the only way that they really measured that firm's performance was based on financial. And it's not a total look at the firm's performance. So they knew then that it was kind of a myopic look at the overall performance of that firm. So Kaplan and Norton developed these other areas of assessment that those managers of that firm should consider. And what this does do, it looks at the firm from both the short-term and long-term objectives. Obviously, short-term would be financial. And when we look at financial ratios, that's a lagging indicator of that firm's performance. Those numbers indicate what that firm has already done. So that's a lagging indicator. So we need to take a look at both short-term, that's important, that we have to stay in business today. And also we have to take a look at long-term. Is that firm in a position that it will be in business in the future? So the areas that we are going to measure here then would be customer perspective, learning and growth, internal business processes, and then financial. So let's start off with customer perspective. Now, this is important, and this is sometimes a challenge for those decision makers within that firm to really have a good look at their firm from a customer's perspective. So it really requires them to kind of step outside of their position in that firm and view their firm from that customer's perspective. How do the customers view that firm? How do they view it in regards to quality, in regards to service, in regards to whatever that product or service is that's being offered to them? Is it a value in the customer's perspective? What about customer service and time elements that might be involved in that? Because if your customers are not happy with your firm, that's your future sales. If they are happy with your firm, that means they're going to be around in the future for you to provide a product or service for them. Second area, learning and growth. Now, is the firm taking the knowledge that it has, that human capital, the information capital, the organization capital, all that intangible knowledge that it might gather there from all of the internal and external sources that it has? Are they taking that information and are they using it for learning and growth? Are we adapting what we are doing internally to those changing needs of those customers? Are those products and services that are being provided now, are they what that customer is going to be looking for in the future? That's going to be important because there's your future sales again. Remember, the balanced scorecard is looking at not only near term, but long term. So both of these are really long term, aren't they? Third one, internal business processes. What are we doing internally now to improve those processes that transfer that input to output? Are we improving on the cycle time? Are we improving on quality? Are we improving our employees' skills and productivity? And are these areas that we are doing improvement, are they areas that will create the greatest impact and contribution to, again, our customer? And then finally, we talked about the financial perspective of the balanced scorecard. Now, this all made sense when Kaplan and Norton came out with it. It really did make sense. I mean, the decision makers go, yeah, we need to take a look at financials. Certainly, that's a given. But we also have to have a consideration of where we're going in the future and whether or not that customer that we currently sell to, they will be buying from us in the future. Made sense. And of course, internal improvements on the firm, that also just makes sense, but it was never really pointed out to them. It was the obvious, but never pointed out. So Kaplan and Norton, to aid those managers in seeing how these processes might play out if they do make a change internally, came up with something called a strategy map. And the strategy map is nothing more than a cause and effect map. If we do this, then these things will happen. That's really what it is. But it really helped those managers because if they were planning to do some sort of internal process improvement, how would that internal process improvement play out on a greater scale of the balanced scorecard? So it provided more of a macro view of that balanced scorecard and organization strategy. Here's an example of a strategy map. So this is Southwest Airlines, and you notice on the top up there, we've got a little bit of information having to do with the vision and mission of the firm, and the strategic theme is really operating efficiency, and the segment of the market that they're going after and the slogan that they have. Those are kind of neat to have at the onset of your strategy map, kind of keeps everyone in perspective of what's going on. On the left-hand side, going vertically, you can see there are areas of the balanced scorecard. Not all of them are listed, but we have financial, customer, and internal processes. Now, in this particular case, Southwest is planning on doing a change with capacity building that comes under internal process. So what they're going to do is they're going to align their ground crew. And they're going to align their ground crew to be more efficient and more effective. So when that plane comes in, they've changed the different processes there to reduce that turnaround time. Now, from that, remember, this is a cause and effect diagram. There's a couple of things that happen. If we are able to reduce our turnaround time, and we know that in business, time equates to money. And if it takes us less time to do something, we can have lower costs. So you notice it going to the left and up is lower costs. That would be one of those effects of this cause. Going to the right for the customer, if we reduce our turnaround time, we could offer lower prices, and certainly reducing our turnaround time will give us on-time flights. And if we have lower prices and on-time flights, well, lower prices will lead to more customers. And more customers and on-time flights gives us increased revenue. And increased revenue and lower cost gives us greater profitability. Let's jump over to something called the value chain and value chain analysis. Well, the value chain is a linked set of value creating activities, beginning with the basic material, the raw material, and ending with either the distributor getting their final product or that customer getting their final product. Now, where your firm is located on that series of value creating activities, that's your center of gravity. That's where your firm has the greatest control over those activities. When we look at a value chain analysis, we're analyzing two sets of activities. We're analyzing primary activities and support activities. Okay, here's an example of a value chain. Well, you can see here we have several steps in this linked set of value creating activities. We have raw materials, and then we transport those raw materials, and then we manufacture them, and then we transport yet again, and then we store those products for distribution. We still have another transport leg, and then we stock retail inventory, and then we transport to consumers. Okay, those are examples of the stages then of a value chain. And what we're doing is we're analyzing all of those steps to see whether or not the firm is able to have an advantage or is at a disadvantage. And here's the areas that we actually are accounting for. We're looking at all inbound logistics, all customs charges, all material handling, all operations, including manufacturing, all outbound logistics, and all sales and service costs. These are called primary activities. Now, when we're doing this, usually that analyst that is doing this type of value chain analysis has a huge spreadsheet and has all of those different products that are listed and all of those activities that are related to those products. And the things that that analyst would be listing down on there on that spreadsheet would not only be cost, but it could be time. Time when it comes to logistics, cost when it comes to logistics. So let's say that our first logistics movement costs the firm $500, and it takes the firm 4 days to get that movement accomplished. Now, if the firm can get information out there on the competition to find out what that first stage of that logistics movement involves with that firm, if it's more or less than 500, is it more or less than those days, we either have an advantage or a disadvantage. And that's what we're looking for when we go all the way through this. We're trying to identify all of our costs, all of the time elements, and whether or not we can get an advantage or a disadvantage. These are primary. Second one, support activities. Now, we'd be looking at the procurement, what we're paying for the material. So purchasing, are we buying that raw material or paying for that service that needs to be done? And is that number that we're paying, is that a appropriate number? Now, one would think that you want to always pay the lowest on that, but not necessarily so. You know, that supplier to you still does have to make some sort of profit. And if you try to cut that cost down that you're paying, that's going to come somewhere from that supplier, and it might come from quality, technology, and the development of technology to support that value chain. Human resource management to staff that value chain, and overall general administration, those managers that oversee all of these activities that occur within that value chain. Well, here's what it looks like when you lay one over the other. You've got our support activities above: infrastructure, HR, tech, and procurement. And then down below, we have logistics, operations, outbound logistics, marketing, and sales and service. And we always want to put a margin of profit on all of our costs to make sure that what we're doing is going to be profitable for that firm. Okay. So the functional areas that we're going to be analyzing internally then, remember this is internal analysis, and that's where all the functional activities live. We're going to be looking at general management. We're going to be looking at HR and R&D. We're going to be looking at marketing, information systems, finance, operations, sales, and customer service. But before we get all of those, one of the areas that we need to consider is the organizational culture. Remember, one of the things I was talking about weeks ago was having to do with, you want to make sure that that culture of the organization is going to be change supportive, or have they been identified as change resistant? And if they're change resistant, we need to do something before we roll out that strategy, because that is going to create problems for our strategy's performance. So when we're looking at organizational culture, we're looking at that pattern of behavior that's been developed by that organization as it learns to cope with its problems of external adaptation, and the integration internally that is taught to the new members in the correct way to perceive, think, and feel. And again, is it going to be change supportive or change resistant? So we have to analyze our culture. Then we move on to our managers. Now I'm going to jog your memory here from your principles of management class. Those areas that all managers must be excel in is right here. The functions of management. All managers should know how to plan. They should know how to organize. They should know how to effectively direct and also control. So let's take a look at those 4 different functions of management. Planning. This is a central area to all functions of management. If a manager does not know how to plan, they should find another position in that firm that does not involve them planning. Forklift driver, if you want, go do something else. But if you're going to be a manager, you have to know how to plan. It's ongoing. It's comprehensive. It's a process that requires management to evaluate where that firm's current position is and where that firm wants to go in the future. Where are we now? Where do we want to go? How are we going to get there? Identifying what it is that we have now, resources and capabilities and competencies. What is it we need in the future? And does a gap exist? And if there's a gap exist, how do we fill that or close that gap? Planning. It's central. Organizing. In addition to that planning, that good manager should be able to analyze the different departments or divisions to coordinate all of them optimally, making sure that they're all working together to achieve that common output, that common goal of strategic performance. Third area, directing, motivating, communicating with those employees, trying to achieve not only the company goals, but those employee goals as well. A good manager tries to identify what those personal goals are of those employees. And is there a way that we can align those personal goals of those employees along with the company goals? And if we can, now we're working in the same direction, both the employee and the company. But that requires good communication from management. And then finally, controlling, establishing and evaluating the performance standards, comparing those performance standards with the objectives and determining whether or not we're on track to meet them, or do we have any potential problems that need to be addressed. 4 functions of management. So we would go through then, and of all those managers in that firm, we want to analyze them and make sure that they know what it is that they're doing. All right, I am going to stop here today, and we will pick up this particular chapter. We'll call it a part 2. But as of right now, this would be chapter 4, internal analysis, part 1. Thank you very much.